That's the problem with drinking, I thought, as I poured myself a drink. If something bad happens, you drink in an attempt to forget. If something good happens, you drink in order to celebrate. And if nothing happens, you drink to make something happen. Charles Bukowski. Today's episode delves into alcoholism among expats in China, including foreign students and workers. First off, let's address the question, are all expats in China alcoholics? The answer is no. And that's about it. Thank you for listening to China University Podcast. This was Chimsy. See you next time. All jokes aside, of course, not all expats in China are alcoholics. I just needed a clickbaity title for this episode so people click and listen to my shit. But, the notion that expats tend to become alcoholics in China has not been discussed anywhere on the internet, at least not on social media. This either means that alcoholism is a taboo among expats in China, or that only a small minority of expats end up becoming alcoholics. Whatever the answer is, I still think it's worth exploring this topic. I mean, I've had friends who swear it sometimes feels as if every single foreigner has abused alcohol or has been abusing alcohol at one point or another while living in China. But it's not hard to imagine though. Bars and restaurants here make it all too easy to grab a drink. Whether it's a casual meeting or a quick why my order delivered straight to your doorstep, alcohol is just everywhere, especially with the expat scene. Now, understanding alcoholism and how it happens in China is crucial, especially because cultural attitudes towards drinking play a big role in China. For example, it's not uncommon for Chinese colleagues to have a drink during meetings or social gatherings, but for those who don't partake, it can feel a bit isolating, and I've seen peer pressure in action many times. I've seen people who don't drink alcohol or smoke, drinking and even smoking just because they want to say "ganbei" with everyone else and not ruin the ceremonial nature of a Chinese gathering. But then again, I want to clarify that I'm not here to be holier than thou and tell you what you should do and what you shouldn't do. I'm not here to preach, really. I think that drinking and not drinking are very personal decisions, and I dare to say that for the majority of expats, drinking might not even be a problem, and I get it. But I also think there are many other foreigners out there who are prone to becoming alcoholics or are alcoholics already and might need help. If you are one of them, I'm not going to tell you to go seek help because, as the saying goes, you can lead a horse to the water, but you cannot make him drink. Meaning that regardless of the fact that an alcoholic expat might need help, if someone truly wants help, they would look for the help themselves. So the purpose of today's episode is not to make you feel like shit for drinking alcohol, but just to talk about it. Because if you go on YouTube or Spotify and type alcoholism, expat, China, man, you cannot find anything related. So people, it's about time we talk about it. So let's see. Let's talk about the expat activities. I feel hitting up the clubs and parties in China are a traditional initiation ceremony. Regardless of whether you come here to work or to study, most people come to China seeking an adventure, right? But based on my experience, what sometimes starts as a short-term thrill can quickly become a long-term habit. Whether you're here for one semester, 2 semesters, a few years, the temptation to join in on the partying will always be there. And partying itself is not what I find problematic. But what partying usually involves can become a problem for some people. Suddenly, what started as a social lubricant can turn into a coping mechanism. And here's where it gets tricky. When does drinking stop being just for fun and start becoming a problem? Drinking for celebratory reasons is one thing, but when it turns into a way for you to cope with the negative feelings you might experience in China, such as loneliness, isolation, lack of belonging, homesickness, sadness, or anger, that's when things get unpredictable and potentially dangerous. So what's the takeaway from all that? Well, not every expat in China has a problem with drinking. There's no denying that alcohol plays a significant role in the expat experience here. I think that almost every foreigner in China would agree with that, especially those who experienced COVID in China, especially those in Shanghai, where, the lockdowns and isolation drove many into seeking solace in alcohol. I think that a bunch of foreigners, especially those who were stocking their rooms or apartments and were dealing with all sorts of stress and emotions, a lot of them couldn't find a good way to unwind. And that's where alcohol comes in. Sure, you could go for a jog and watch a movie, read a book, and find other healthy ways to cope. But alcohol, there's something about alcohol that just makes it look so much better. It makes you look things better than they are. It's like no matter what's going on, you could be in the most boring gathering that you still feel you're having the time of your life, or so you think, because it's all an illusion. You are just too numb to realize. And man, it's tough to keep things under control here in China, in the land of no familial supervision, right? You're on your own. Nobody's telling you when enough is enough, nor your friends, nor your family. So you get home late, maybe a bit too tipsy or completely smashed. And who's there to give you the minimum amount of shit for you to reflect a little bit on your decisions? Nobody. Exactly. And after every night out, everyone just assumes you're good to go. And that's the thing, Drinking is so normalized in this country, not just among expats, but also among the locals. I think some people will agree when I say that every night out in China will almost always include this weird alcoholic ritual we all partake in willingly and unwillingly, sometimes just randomly or unintentionally. Take, for example, the expat dynamics in the big cities of China, where there's a bunch of expat communities. Where do they gather? Where do they go? What do they do? Like my friend was saying the other day, when he first arrived to China, he was clueless about where to find other expats to hang out with. Some people come to China and wonder why bother connecting with other expats instead of Chinese locals. Well, honestly, I think we need a bit of both. Connecting with Chinese people gives you that sense of belonging, especially if you make friends with them. But at the same time, seeing other foreigners around adds to the feeling of, oh, hey, I'm not alone in this. Being in China is normal. But let's be real, making Chinese friends is not easy. And finding fellow expats that have the time and willingness to hang out with you regularly is even more difficult, in my opinion. So what do most lonely people do? Well, they end up going to the same expat bars and restaurants, and that seems to be the go-to approach to connection here in China. And an invitation to drink is just one of those things that most expats will say yes to. Even if the event is boring, a few drinks can make it bearable. And yeah, alcohol can turn a regular hangout into a party, especially if everyone is drinking. And then, the night is over, you go back home, and naturally, you don't think much about the amount and the frequency at which you're drinking, and neither do your friends. You can't tell who's struggling with alcohol addiction. You cannot tell who is drinking themselves to sleep, but you can sort of anticipate it. Because once people start hitting the bottle more than twice or 3 times a week, it's not hard to see them sliding down a slippery slope. Man, it's just so difficult to drink here in China. And the fact that alcohol is so affordable makes it even more accessible to people. Like I mentioned earlier, you can pick it up at a convenience store or have it delivered at your doorstep anytime, 24/7. And this can make you even more prone to alcohol abuse, because maybe back home alcohol was less accessible for you, maybe because most shops and venues would close after a certain hour, or maybe because most shops were far away from your house. So what exactly makes expats so prone to alcohol abuse? Well, one issue is that some expats don't really have other go-to activities besides hitting the bars and clubs. Now, I'm not saying that all expats in China are getting liquored up every night, but there's always the same crowd that hangs out at the same spots, And yeah, some of them might be grappling with alcohol addiction and unintentionally enabling other friends along the way. Then there's the matter of different levels of responsibility. If you got a regular job, drinking every day could put your job at risk, and you could potentially get fired if your drink gets out of hand. But if you're a student, you're pretty much under no supervision, making it easier for you to fall into a drinking routine, especially if you don't have a ton of commitments, meaning very little classes and very little homeworks and relaxed deadlines. Here's another point to consider. Some individuals fall into what you might call the category of functional alcoholics. These are the ones who can still manage to fulfill their responsibilities like going to work and attending classes and generally keep things together. But here's the tricky part with being a functional alcoholic. There's a very thin line between being functional and spiraling into full-blown alcoholism. It's like walking on a tightrope, trying to maintain balance, and this is particularly dangerous because the moment things go south for you, you might lose that balance and resort to alcohol to cope. Things that make functional alcoholics lose that balance often include school or work-related stress, a bad breakup, getting fired, getting in debt, or grief. Also, mental health problems such as depression, anxiety, and OCD. And yeah, there's definitely a stigma attached to all of these things, including alcoholism. And as you may know, some people often use the term alcoholic in a derogatory way. But from my perspective, it's a term to acknowledge that sometimes drinking habits can get out of hand. It can be challenging to recognize, especially when alcohol consumption is so normalized here in China and pretty much everywhere else as well. And it's easy to get caught up in it when your friends are all doing the same. Take, for instance, the expats working in China, especially expats working as teachers at a bilingual or international school. I've known quite a few expat teachers that hit the bars on weekdays, then show up the next day either nursing the mother of all hangovers or just drunk. And, at this point, I wouldn't be surprised if you have heard similar stories from other expats, but it's pretty clear to me now that most expats that drink at inappropriate places or at inappropriate times are people who might be grappling with something, usually something deep, I mean, I doubt there are any expats out there leading a picture-perfect life free from stress and worries who is drinking alcohol every day. When you see someone overindulging, drinking alcohol every day like there's no tomorrow, know for sure that this person is suffering. It's simply a way for them to escape from some hidden negative feelings buried deep inside. You feel invincible, right? You think nothing can touch you. You're the epitome of chimsy. When the China immortality syndrome kicks in, you believe nothing bad could ever happen to you as long as you're under the numbing effects of alcohol. That's usually when the expats tend to become alcoholics, in my opinion. And what's surprising about expats and alcoholism is that when they're so used to going out drinking, they start hanging out less and less with those who don't drink. Somehow you start thinking that people who don't drink are not as fun. I used to be like that, I thought people who didn't drink were boring, but in reality, it was just a reflection of the fact that I would feel really bored if I had to face the sober nature of life and all the other activities that do not involve drinking. Here's the thing. If it's as if alcohol convinces you as there's the only way to create memories is with a drink in hand and surrounded by your drinking buddies. That's likely why you might subconsciously view those who drink as fun and those who don't as boring. In other words, you're under the spell of feel-good hormones, human conditioning, and positive and negative reinforcements that lead you to distance yourself from non-drinkers and gravitate towards drinkers, further reinforcing your drinking habit. Like I said before, COVID times, man. COVID times were tough for most people living in China. And, when people suffer for too long, they become toxic. and adopt toxic coping mechanisms. I remember how alcohol became a topic of public interest during the lockdowns in Shanghai. And after everything opened up in Shanghai, people really went nuts. I believe the number of expats you'd see drinking increased dramatically after the lockdown was over. Most bars were closed by 2 a.m., but some few bars were still going at 4, 5, and even 7 in the morning. 7 in the morning, I mean, who hangs out at a bar at 7 a.m.? Well, just let me tell you that the very few times I went to these bars and managed to stay till 7 a.m., I saw the saddest, the angriest, the loneliest expats I've ever seen. And honestly, I've never seen any expat having a blast at a bar at 7 a.m. in China. Most of them just looked miserable, man. Like they're not in a good place in life. And one night, it made me wonder whether I was in a good place or a bad place in life for me to be there. With all these sad foreigners, I never went back after that night. My friends and I refer to that place as the ninth circle of hell, the deepest circle of Dante's Inferno, reserved for those foreigners guilty of trickery maybe against themselves. And, I think the moment you start realizing how alcohol is affecting your health and your mental clarity, that's when you start wondering whether things are getting out of hand, especially if you're someone who manages to keep up appearances despite drinking regularly. Because the health effects might be subtle at first, so subtle that you might not even notice. Now, when it comes to quitting, I think that there are two approaches. One is to just stop drinking completely and stop hanging out with those who incite the drinking. The other approach is to only drink for celebratory purposes, which is my approach these days, and I try to stick to it religiously and, most importantly, honestly. Because, man, you couldn't possibly be celebrating things every single day, right? It's not true, right? Now, the thing is that this approach also involves eliminating any casual or spontaneous drinking, and it only allows celebratory and more intentional drinking. I think that this approach also involves saying no more than often and refusing to attend social events that usually involve drinking. That has worked pretty well for me so far, but hey, different people, different approaches. My approach might or might not work for you. But if you're trying to quit or reduce your alcohol intake, you can buy my 12-step course on my website now for only $200. See it as an investment. I'm messing with you. I'm not selling anything to you. But all jokes aside, if you are trying to change your drinking habits, you might as well begin by regarding alcohol as a drink exclusive to genuine celebrations or other genuine special occasions. Because, you see, sometimes you want to hang out with your friends, but at the same time, you know exactly how the night will unfold. And what really sucks is that sometimes if you suggest doing something different that doesn't involve drinking, it's tough to get everyone on board, especially if your friends are already used to the same drinking every time we meet dynamic. And convincing them to do something that doesn't involve drinking can be a little hard, right? And I get it. Alcohol often feels like the easiest way to unwind and relax, so it's easier to get people to join in. And you give into it as well. We all do that at one point. But here's the thing. There is a Chinese saying, 借酒浇愁,愁更愁, meaning using alcohol to drown sorrows only leads to more sorrows. But I think most people drink when they are at a neutral or happy state of mind. But after a while, for some people, alcohol might start becoming more of a downer. Some people might feel great while drinking, but then the morning after, they wake up feeling like shit. Not because of the hangover, but because of the anxiety and depression the day after. And while I'm sure that this is not the case for everyone, it was the case for me. And in spite of this, one will start associating alcohol with happiness, but it just ends up making things worse. I don't think people always realize that. I mean, while partying, you see foreigners having a good time, right? But you can't see the slippery slope that some expats might be on. And the worst part is that these groups of expats friends sometimes unintentionally enable each other to drink more and more often. And man, it's so hard to not find yourself in a situation in which there's no alcohol readily available. There are just so many places to grab a drink, and it's like there's always an option nearby, at least in Shanghai. And you can find spots where you can even play soccer, basketball, and baseball, and ping pong, drive go-karts, all while drinking. Sounds like fun for many, and it is fun, not gonna lie, but I think places like this help normalize drinking alcohol so much that at one point drinking anywhere just makes sense. And I know that it's not just China. I'm sure places like this exist all over the world. But then you quickly realize that almost every expat activity seems to revolve around alcohol, bars, and restaurants. And for many expats, hitting the same bars and clubs becomes a ritual. And before you know it, you're stuck in that loop every weekend or even weekdays. And sometimes when you see foreigners at bars, clubs, and restaurants in China, you can't help but to wonder if there's more to China than just what you've been experiencing as an expat. And there certainly is. There's so much more to China than just drinking. There's traveling and exploring, studying the language and culture, sports and hobbies, connecting with people and dating, art, doing business, you name it. But in my opinion, alcohol is the easiest way out of expat boredom and loneliness. I remember my friend telling me one day, man, I have everything I need in China, but it's the end of the month. I just got my salary and it's a Friday night and I have no one to hang out with. Tell me, how can I not go to a bar tonight and drink myself into oblivion? Well, he certainly thought he had everything he needed, but in the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, he had satisfied his most basic physiological needs, safety and security, which are at the bottom of the Maslow's pyramid. But he was lacking the needs from the upper levels of the pyramid, like love, belonging, family, friendship, and the sense of connection. So what's the takeaway from all this? Look, I think that alcohol consumption among expats in China isn't just about having a good time. I think it's deeply intertwined with social norms, cultural experiences, and even coping mechanisms. And while not every foreigner may struggle with alcoholism, it's clear that the accessibility and the normalization of drinking in China can present challenges for many, especially if you or your family have a history with addiction. Sometimes the absence of family and friends who could see you potentially becoming an alcoholic, together with the peer pressure and stress, can really put you in a dangerous place in China. I hate the fact that drinking is such a big thing among expats, but there's nothing I can do about it. Plus, I'm sure that most foreigners have a good grip on their alcohol consumption, but I am also sure that any foreigner in China has the potential of becoming an alcoholic. What really helps you to stay away from addiction is to broaden your horizons. And then again, I know this sounds like total bullshit, but there's more to China than just the nightlife and the drinking. I also think that exploring alternative activities and connecting with people outside of the drinking culture might just lead to new discoveries. And it will give you a much richer experience in China, in my opinion. So let's raise a glass to that, but maybe a glass of water this time. Cheers to new adventures and finding balance in our expat journey. This was Chimsy. See you next time.